Well, welcome everyone. So tonight we're going to be talking about the ways that in which racism, white supremacy, and anti-Blackness impact children. It impact Black children. Not only, is it harmful, obviously, to Black adults, but it's especially harmful to Black children. They're not, they don't escape the harms of racism just because they're children. If they live in America, they're still subjected to it just like adults are. So that's what we're going to be digging into this evening. I know that this is a heavy, weighty, painful thing to talk about. It is for myself, as I'm sure it is for many of you. So I just want to acknowledge that as we open. And I just want to share a quote from James Baldwin. "The children of the despised and rejected are menaced from the moment they stir in the womb." And unfortunately, I just felt like this quote kind of sets the tone for what we're going to be talking about this evening. Given the topic of the event, I just want to acknowledge that we're going to be centering Black voices and experiences when we do get to the discussion part. So I just want us all to be mindful of that as we move through the discussion. So, what we're going to do now is. Oh, sorry. I wanted to also share this quote by Ta-Nehisi Coates. So I am a mom of two. I have two boys who are 10 and 14. They've always been really tall for their ages. So unfortunately, this is a topic that I grapple with, that I worry about all the time as a mom of two boys in America. And I read Between the World and Me. It's Ta-Nehisi Coates. It's almost like a love letter to his Black son. And this is one of the quotes that just like kind of stayed with me and haunted me when I read that book. So I just want to share it with you all as we continue to set the tone for this conversation. "Black people love their children with a kind of obsession. Yes, you are all we have, and you come to us endangered. I think we would like to kill you ourselves before seeing you killed by the streets that America made. That is a philosophy of the disembodied, of a people who control nothing, who can protect nothing, who are made to fear not just the criminals among them, but the police who lord over them with all the moral authority of a protection racket. It was only after you that I understood love, that I understood the grip of my mother's hand, that she knew that the galaxy itself could kill me, that all of me could be shattered, and all of her legacy spilled upon the curb like bum wine." So once again, that's a quote from Ta-Nehisi Coates from his book, Between the World and Me. If you haven't read it, I definitely recommend it. So what we're going to do now is I want to share with you all a few images. I want to invite you, if you would like to turn on your screens, if you would, so this feels like more of a communal activity. But I'm going to share a few images with you. I want you to either share in the chat or you can unmute yourself and share out loud. Anything that just like kind of comes up for you when you see the image, what do you think about? What is your gut reaction to these images? So it's going to be two images and then it's going to be a video clip. But we're going to start with an image and we'll do that now. So again, feel free to share out loud what comes up for you. What are your thoughts, feelings, emotions about these images? And also feel free to share in the chat. Okay. All right, we have another image. This image is not about Beyonce, but any other images, anything else that comes up for you when you see it? Anything that comes up for you from this image? Eleanor?
Well, I was just gonna say I've never seen this picture of Beyonce with her daughter, and so part of me is getting very like fangirl and excited. Like, look at how great they look together, and I like something about like how like fancy they are together. Yeah, twins, totally.
Thank you, Eleanor. Anything else is coming up for people?
Her child looks just like her husband. I'm sorry, it had to be said. That has his whole face. No, I mean, I think that like I'm just getting this very interesting like thing. I think so important, kind of like a mother-daughter bonding situation, but clearly with people who have a lot more money. So it looks like really, really fancy. But like she looks like she's protecting and holding her daughter. She's excited and proud, but also like I'm assuming, because I'm not a parent, but it's like one of those kind of girl, like you have a daughter moment and you're just like, we can like match, and you're gonna have like a cute outfit, I'm gonna have a cute outfit, and we're gonna like take pictures, and it's kind of like almost like a mother-daughter rites of passage.
Thank you, Julia. Anything else?
Yeah, I wrote in the chat about the mother-daughter bond, but I'll also add that I think the picture is adorable. Seeing them made me think about my daughter. I have two children. A girl is my first and a boy is the second. She's now almost 12. But I think about right around that time, of course, Blue Ivy has on a bikini top or crop top, was right around that time where I had to start second guessing clothing options, like where I was made to feel to second guess.
Mm. Can you talk a little bit more about that, Kendra, why you felt you had to second guess clothing options?
Yeah, definitely just the idea of what's appropriate for girls specifically, like happens like very early. Like one of the first early things is I remember having to think about whether it was okay to put my daughter in a bikini style bathing suit at 2 or 3, whether that was considered okay. They were cute, they were in Target, I wanted to buy them. And more than likely I did. I mean, there's there's a picture of my daughter in like a purple bikini top. It's an adorable picture. We were at the beach. But it was right around that time that I knew that I had to think before I even made the purchase. It was that additional thought of how will other people perceive her, me, her in this item, all of those different things, the judgment, and then the judgment plus safety.
Mm. Thank you.
Mm.
I like that you include the word safety in there. Thank you, Kendra.
Mm.
Anything else that's coming up for folks? Okay, so next we have a short video clip. Many of you probably remember in 2015 during the uprising here in Baltimore after the murder of Freddie Gray, that a local mom went down to the Mondawmin area and got her son from that area. She saw him on the news and she went and got him. So in the clip, there is a television person kind of giving their own narration of what's happening. I want you all to focus on what's happening between her and her son and kind of try to not so much take in what the narrator is talking about, but focus on what's happening between her and her son. And I want us to watch the clip, take in what's that interaction, and then talk about what's coming up for us. So I saw Ray put something in the chat. Ray, did you want to expand on that? Or did anyone else want to share things that came up came up for them from watching that clip?
I think by her doing that at that time, I get her anger and frustration. Like, that's my son. He's out there. He's participating in this riot like atmosphere, and I want to get him out there. I mean, out of that situation. But to go up to him like that and to just, smack him around in front of everybody and then remove the mask. So now everybody knows, the police knows, okay, this is such and such name and this is Miss such and such. I don't think that was the right time for her to do that. I get that she wants to bring her son out of harm, but it looked like she just went there and created more harm to her son because she hit him. She didn't just go there, grab the hand and then pull him away. She went there and kind of humiliated him, embarrassed him. Even I get it. He's doing wrong. He is doing wrong. He had no business there, but she should have waited. That's what I think.
Okay, thank you, Ray. Again, I heard the words harm, kind of connecting back to what Kendra was saying about safety. Those are some of the words that came up for me when you shared. Thank you, Ray. Anything else that's coming up from people after watching that clip?
I'll share a bit. So I remember when this incident actually happened. I was, funny enough, like downtown. I had to like go back home and rush and had to like watch it on my TV. And I remember the conversations afterwards, just about like, oh, she was a really caring mom, and we need to be, doing more stuff like this, and we, because she's worried about her son. And I remember just like watching it, because I mean, look. You got a Black mom, you've probably been embarrassed maybe in front of your friends when you act up. Like, it is like, it happens, it's happened to me. You've been kind of maybe put in your place in front of your friends. But I think it was like one of the times I was so uncomfortable because there was like the conversation that was happening in the Black community about what was going on and how the mom needed to do X, Y, Z and this, that, and the other. And there was like, I think not always a lot of context about what exactly happened, what was happening. Like, we still don't know who, told the trains or whatever not to go over in Mondawmin. And like, there's so many other conversations. And then that lack of conversation, lack of nuance was added to the national conversation. And it was used as this like, oh, well, if only Black parents did this, and they showed up for their kids, these issues wouldn't exist or these issues wouldn't happen. And it was kind of like their children. Like, it was a child, his friends were down there. Probably he was trying to get home. And this really historic now event has happened. And I understood the mother. I understood like the need for safety, but I also understood like the child was kind of like need to be apart. And so I think that sometimes as Black children, that safety thing is a lot more powerful than that need to be a part of community, whether we agree with that or not. And I think that, I'm very happy you started with that quote from Ta-Nehisi, because I think that's pretty much what it is that mother would have rather have seen, like, she would have rather embarrassed him. She would have rather have like harmed him than the state getting him. And when I reflect on that even more deeply, it's both like sad and just like, I mean, yeah, it's just sad. Like, I mean, that I would much rather harm you than for these people to get you, because it's going to be 10 times worse. That's something I can't imagine or fathom, whether I agree with her or not. So just a lot of, I think, feelings for all involved.
Thank you, Julia. Anyone else want to share?
It's hard to look at it without the lens of the additional commentary that's around it. Like, I'm really trying my hardest to like think about, well, how was she thinking in the moment? Was she just thinking like, all right, this is how I already deal with conflict, and this is how I'm planning to protect my son and get myself out of there? Or it is the additional thing is that you are out here embarrassing me, and I can't have that. So I'm going to perform discipline on you. And that is the shit that I hate. Can I curse on it? Because it's like, it's just something that I don't like. it is a common thing to hear about like children being embarrassed in front of their friends or being embarrassed in front of adults, but it's not about the child in that situation. It's definitely about the adult who wants to perform like their corrective behavior. And it's I just think that it's ridiculous and it's not beneficial to anybody. I would never want to embarrass my children. I don't have to perform, I guess disciplinary tactics for anybody.
Thank you, Kendra.
I think I was gonna, oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Dana.
I was just going to say Kendra, what you just said made me see this in a whole different way, the sense of performance of the mother. And it made me question for the first time, like, what on earth is that camera even doing? Because it's such an intimate family drama. It's like really dramatic, and the emotions of both of them in different ways is so strong. And so now I'm feeling really gross that I'm watching this thing at all. Like, why are we watching this? This is a private family thing. But the embarrassment of the child, I hadn't thought about it in that terms, the embarrassment of the mother too. And now I'm seeing a whole lot of different things.
Well, Dana, and sorry to because I know Julia, you were just about to talk. Well, I just do want to add, Dana, is that why is the camera there? We kind of almost always feel like the camera is there. This time an actual camera was there, but we're made to feel like a camera is always there.
Thank you.
Well, can I jump in real quick? So that camera was there. It's like almost perfect timing. The camera caught an angle of the chaos, but also a deeper setting of internal structure of the Black family with the mother. You get me? Like at the time of watching that, obviously we don't know the background. We don't know if she's single or not, but after that, we realized she was single because she went on an interview with the Sun and she was like, yeah, I'm a single mother. So it's just like, you already got that stigma. Like, it's like she's doing too much. I get it. At the end of the day, she wants to protect her child, right? But that is totally the wrong way of doing it. And also, it's like, she didn't understand in the moment that, okay, I'm doing more harm to him than good because socially, he's being embarrassed on TV. His friends are seeing this. Everybody's seeing this. The police are seeing this. You know what I mean? Like in that moment, you're not thinking of your son in the right lens. You're just not you're just not seeing what the ramification is of you slapping them, grabbing them. You know, it's like what's the word? She's just doing bad to everybody. You get me? At the end of the day, like I said, I get that you're a mother and you just want your kid out of that because that was definitely scary. That whole atmosphere down Montgomery, that was crazy. And I don't even think a lot of people know like how that led up to that situation because they shut down the subways, they shut down the bus route to go there. So I don't know if that kid was trying to escape and he just got caught up in the moment. You know what I mean? But the whole police force, they did the wrong thing because they already anticipated all this. So kids are getting out of school with Frederick Douglass. They trying to go home. Now they stuck. You get me? They literally stuck in a bowl. They can't get out. Nobody can get in, and it's just chaos there. So I do feel for the mother, but I really think she just didn't do that in a good way.
Thank you, Ray. Thank you for adding about, I was going to add that in, but thank you for adding, the context that those kids did not have away homes. They were purposely trapped, right? And I kind of want to save some of this for the discussion at the end. But yeah, I think Ray, you were kind of hitting on, and some of you also hitting on, like, there's one thing to want your kid to be safe, but then there's this other part of it that happened that kind of makes you a little uncomfortable.
I was gonna also add that, like, a few things, but like, for one, which makes the conversation, the national conversation of it, even worse, because I learned years ago that there was no addition of like, oh yeah, like a major transportation hub had been closed down when this incident happened. So what people were actually saying was like, oh, this Black person was killed, and then people were rioting and kids were throwing things at the police of their own volition, as opposed to the fact that, oh, the police were sent to this space, to a major transportation hub, and that it was shut down, and no one still knows who did that or who ordered that. And they were waiting for kids as they were coming from school. But there were teachers who were like, I was dropping people off and they were like, okay, well, how do I get home? The teachers had to drive students home. It's like, so that all of this was happening at the same time. And furthermore, and I don't know, I'm not sure if this is going to be like for the later part of the conversation, but I think the performance of how we protect our children is a conversation that has probably been something we want to talk about for a very long time. And it reminds me of that Ta-Nehisi quote, the quote that you use, but also of like Toni Morrison's Beloved, and how, like, you know, the idea that like, I would rather kill you than let white people get their hands on you, than let the state get their hands on you. And there, like I said, I am not a parent. And so there has got to be, even as performative as it is, I really do believe that that mother was terrified that her child could be the next Freddie Gray or Mike Brown, and that this was on our TVs, this was on our social media, and that for her, as performative as it was, she wanted to make sure that like she was protecting her kid, and that people saw her protecting her kid, that people saw her like be extra. So there was no doubt that she does not excuse this behavior, because the other reality is that while we have the denial of innocence for our children, but we also don't really support just Black people in general. We don't believe that they take care of their kids. And so whether we agree with how that looks is a different discussion, but I think there's a lot of like performative stuff happening. I'm really glad that Kendra, you had brought that up. So that's all I'm gonna say for now.
Thank you, Julie. That added piece of, as a Black mom, there's already this thing of that I'm not a good enough mom just because I'm a Black mom. And I've experienced this many times. People assuming things about me simply because I'm Black, of how I mother my children. So thank you for adding that extra layer. Anything else?
The thing that was really drawing my attention was looking at, I was thinking about the height differential between the mom and her son, and then thinking about, Michelle, what you were saying earlier about your kids being tall for their age, and about how that just sort of contributes to this like adultification of Black kids. And then thinking about the ways that language around Black kids can sort of in like the public narrative, like turn them into adults with assumptions of like adult decision making and adult consequences and all these things. Whereas, you know, kids of a similar age who are white will be, well, those are boys, those are girls, you know, as opposed to, you know, seeing, well, they're adults, they're, or even saying like they're young adults or whatever. But yeah, the idea of adultification of skewing the kids older. And so sort of thinking about that, like that juxtaposition of like being the height of an adult, but being a kid.
Right.
And yeah.
No, we're going to talk a little bit about that, but yeah, that's a very real thing. Black children as young as 10 are not seen as being needing childlike protection, right? So at age 10, Black children are seen as not being the same age as their peers, or not given the benefit of the doubt or childlike innocence that their white peers are getting. So this starts at age 10. I believe that young man is 16, because 5 years later, I saw an interview where 5 years later, he was 21. So he's only 16, right? Yeah, he's tall for his age, but he's a child, right? So thank you for bringing that up, Rebecca. Anything else? Okay, we're gonna move on to talk about a little bit of historical context. Here at BRJA, when we talk about things that are happening currently in our society, we like to give it some historical framework. So I have a slide about that. It was interesting when I started researching this, there was actually not a lot about the treatment of Black children during slavery, which says a lot too, right? That we don't even really have much documentation about how Black children were treated during slavery. That still says a lot in and of itself, right? So while the treatment of Black children in slavery varied widely depending on the people they were owned by, typically children didn't, but Black children typically did have to do forced labor, right? Sometimes as young as toddlers, 2 years old, as soon as they could walk. Sometimes they were in the fields with their parents, right? But typically the age was around 7, and they were made to do things like bringing water into the fields. A lot of times they would have to be the playmate to the white family. If the white family that they were owned by had children, they were usually their playmate, or they also were responsible for that child. If that child got hurt, they could also be in trouble for that, right? So they were given a lot of responsibility at a very young age. They also sometimes had to watch out for other children, other enslaved children. That would be their responsibility to watch out for those children. So a lot of responsibility being hoisted upon children because they are slaves, right? They were also poorly fed and oftentimes malnourished. From my research, I saw, and some of you may have heard this before, that a lot of times children who were enslaved were fed out of pig troughs. So just like a super inhumane way to treat children. They were subjected to beatings, and they also witnessed the beatings of adults, right? That was super traumatizing for kids. Sometimes children who were enslaved would kind of try to process some of that trauma by playing games where they would hide switches and then hit each other with them, right? And that was kind of their way of trying to process some of it. They also would play games where they would reenact people being sold on a slave auction block, right? Unfortunately, this was like their way as children to try to process some of this. They were poorly clothed, if clothed at all. They were not given shoes. They were also subjected to sexual abuse. There's not a lot of research on this, but we know that it happened. If it was happening to the adults, it was definitely happening to Black children because they were not protected. And Black children could also be sold away from their families. In the early 1800s, there is a law passed that said that children had to be at least 10 before they could be sold away from their families, which is like heartbreaking to think about, right? Like that they thought they were doing a good thing by saying like, let's wait till they're 10. So that just goes to show how often it happened, right? That very often, especially if a master died and then now the family's wealth is being split up and divided up, oftentimes Black children were separated from their parents in this way. So that's just to give like a little bit of historical context. If people are interested in learning more about the ways in which children were treated during slavery, I think slave narratives are a good place to look. Frederick Douglass talks about his treatment as a slave. He talks about how his mom would travel overnight, sometimes on foot, to spend just a few hours with him, and those hours were usually spent with them sleeping, just so she could spend a few hours with her son, because they lived on different plantations. He, up until the age of 6, lived with his grandmother, who lived off of the plantation, but once he was 6, he had to start working. Slave narratives are a good source if you're interested in learning more about how children were treated during slavery. Any questions or comments about the historical context? Okay, so what we're going to do now is we have a video that we're going to watch about how children, how anti-Blackness affects them, how Black children are affected by anti-Blackness within the school system and how it leads to the school to prison pipeline. I just want to preface this by saying that this video was made to promote Joe Biden. So just kind of tune out that propaganda, but it does have some really good information about, how things are happening on a systematic level to our children in this country through the school system. So we're going to watch that now.
In September of 2019, a 6-year-old student named Kaya was sitting in her school's office.
Okay, she's gonna have to come with us now.
That's a police officer. This video comes from his body camera. At first, it seems like Kaya doesn't know what's happening. Earlier that day, Kaya had a tantrum. 3 school employees said that she had kicked them. The school called the police, who arrested Kaya on charges of misdemeanor battery.
I don't want to go to the police car.
The police dropped the charges after Kaya's grandmother sent this video to the Orlando Sentinel. Kaya's case isn't an isolated incident.
A 5-year-old girl being handcuffed by police in Florida.
For a year, he could not sleep alone.
He put handcuffs on me.
Tossed to the ground by a school resource officer.
What you're seeing are the effects of a larger problem in American schools. The U.S. doesn't treat all students equally. But if we wanted to, we could do something about that. The next president could decide if that happens. In 2016, researchers at Yale showed teachers this video clip of 4 preschool students. Their instructions: look for misbehavior and click when you see it. The study was kind of deceptive. None of the kids in the video actually misbehaved. The researchers were using eye tracking software. What they actually wanted to study was who the teachers were watching. Both Black and white teachers spent significantly more time watching the Black boy in the video. This study showed that even preschool teachers can treat kids differently based on their race without even realizing it. Look elsewhere in the US school system, and you'll see this show up in other ways, like at this middle school in Bryan, Texas. They gave students tickets for offenses like disrupting class or using profanity. Black students were 4 times more likely than white students to receive those tickets. Nationwide, Black boys miss way more school due to suspensions than any other group. And this can start a kind of chain reaction. Missing weeks of school due to suspensions makes students much more likely to drop out. Without a diploma, you're much less likely to earn a living wage and much more likely to be incarcerated. All this missing school is helping to drive the highest poverty and incarceration rates in the developed world. So it's worth asking, how'd we get here? In 1964, President Lyndon Johnson created a new federal office accountable to the president, the Office for Civil Rights. Its first task was to desegregate public schools in the South. But soon, they started noticing that some schools were segregating their students without actually calling it segregation.
A lot of the Black students would be labeled disabled and removed from the mainstream classroom, so they wound up segregated.
Daniel Lowson studies school discipline. For years, he's been sounding the alarm about how much school Black students are missing due to suspensions. The data he uses in his reports comes from the Office for Civil Rights. In the 1970s, they started requiring schools to report how many students they classified as disabled, plus suspensions and expulsions, all broken down by race and gender. Over the next few decades, those numbers went up as more punitive ideas about discipline took hold in American schools. Well, in some schools.
Gangs and drugs have taken over our streets and undermined our schools.
The idea that if you don't, throw the book at kids when they're young for every little thing that they're going to turn into criminals. There's never any research to show that it actually worked. You never see that in schools serving mostly white kids.
But in 2011, a new report out of Texas started to cast doubt on that approach. The study looked at discipline records for almost 1 million students. It tracked the same kids from 7th grade all the way through high school. The results were stunning. Nearly 60% of students had been suspended or expelled at least once. The study also showed that Black students facing school discipline for the first time tended to get harsher punishments than white students. And the more disciplinary violations a student received, the more likely they were to drop out. Clearly, Texas had a big problem. The question now was if the problem was bigger than Texas. To figure that out, the Obama administration turned to the data set that the Office for Civil Rights had built. That's how they learned this was a nationwide problem.
African American students are over 3 times more likely than their white peers to be suspended or expelled, often for very similar offenses.
They also discovered that the vast majority of suspensions were for behaviors like talking back, using profanity, or violating the dress code.
Non-violent student behaviors, many of which once meant a phone call home.
The administration started investigating school districts where the numbers were the most damning. One of those districts was Bryan, Texas, home of the discipline tickets. In 2013, a woman named Marjorie Holman filed a complaint after her 12-year-old son was suspended for defending himself from a bully and had to appear in adult criminal court. The Office of Civil Rights opened an investigation in Bryan, along with hundreds of other school districts.
If you can't justify what you're doing and it's having a harmful impact on one group more than others, you have to replace it with something else.
But we don't actually know if those changes made a difference, because the most recent data on the Office of Civil Rights website is from the 2015-2016 school year. The year after that, things started to change.
The 51-50 vote to confirm Betsy DeVos.
The vice president votes in the affirmative and the nomination is confirmed.
In 2017, the Office of President Trump's new education secretary, Betsy DeVos, sent a memo to the staff at the Office of Civil Rights. This one super jargony line in the memo signaled a huge shift. OCR will only apply a systemic or class action approach where the individual complaint allegations themselves raise systemic or class-wide issues. Translation: no more looking for patterns in the data. If the office got a complaint like Marjorie Holman's, they would look for one thing: written or verbal proof that an individual teacher or administrator had punished Marjorie's son more harshly because he was Black.
We're not going to question that unless there's the smoking gun of intentional racism.
That's what happened in Bryan, Texas. When Betsy DeVos took office, the investigation into Bryan's schools was close to wrapping up. The final report concluded that Black students were subject to disparate treatment when compared to white students engaged in the same or similar conduct. They had dozens of recommendations for the district: revise their discipline code, hire mentors and social workers, extra training for teachers. DeVos's team scrapped the report and closed the investigation with no finding of wrongdoing and no suggestions for improvement. If you look closely at this clip, you can see Joe Biden standing right behind President Clinton as he signs the 1994 crime bill. That bill ushered in new tough-on-crime policies that devastated Black communities. As a senator, Biden played a key role in getting the bill passed.
We have predators on our streets. They are beyond the pale, many of those people.
And since then, he's had to confront that history.
I haven't always been right. There's systematic racism that most of us whites don't like to acknowledge even exists. It's been built into every aspect of our system.
This policy plan comes from the Biden campaign. In the section titled School Discipline, it says that Biden would reinstate Obama's discipline guidelines and would push for every state to submit a plan for reducing the use of policies and practices that push kids out of school. Some people believe that all racism is explicit. a nasty slur, a whites only sign, a burning cross. It's unmistakable and it's on purpose. But there's another way of understanding racism. That laws and policies can have racist outcomes even if they don't mention race at all. That you don't always need a smoking gun to do a whole lot of damage.
Thanks for watching this episode of our 2020 election series. For this series, we asked you what you wish the candidates would talk about.
Okay, so I have a slide that I'm going to share that kind of reiterates what we've been talking about before we go into our discussion questions. Actually, before we do that, were there any questions, comments that anyone wanted to share about the clip that we watched? Okay. So I found an article that I'm going to go back and finish reading it. I suggest that you all do as well. And it, this article was talking about kind of what we've been talking about here, and I felt like it was worded really well, so I wanted to share it with you all. And the name of the article is Anti-Blackness and the Adultification of Black Children, which Rebecca had used that word, adultification, thank you for that, in U.S. Prison Nation by Emil Gilmore. So he talks about Black children being pathologized as deviant, adult-like problems. Black children occupy life in a liminal space where they are denied childhood status, but carry adult-like culpability. As adultified Black youth, they lack autonomy and are not granted leniency to learn from their mistakes like their white peers. With their actions and intentions perceived as deviant, ill-willed, or hypersexual, Black children are susceptible to a wide range of violence, from school punishment, the criminal justice system, sexual abuse, exploitation, and excessive police force. So I just thought that he did a really good job in the beginning of that article, kind of pulling together what we were talking about here today and some of the things that were already brought up by some of you in our discussions. And it's just something that I want us to be thinking about the history of how Black children have been treated from the inception of this country, and how it is still carrying over and affecting how they are being treated today, how they're being viewed by society in the school system and in the criminal justice system due to racism and white supremacy, and the foundations of how they've been treated in this country. Any questions, comments about this quote?
I have a comment that I'm not even exactly sure how to unpack it, because I was just thinking about it now. Okay. All these, can you hear me?
Yeah, go ahead, Kendra.
Okay, so it's like, for me, as a person who considers myself to be a learned individual, like these are the type of articles that I would read, that I would understand, that I would want to share. Even understanding that type of information kind of impacts how I parent my children, in that I have this understanding of how the world impacts them. And because I want to protect them, I find myself having conversations directly related to source material like this, but even I have to wonder if it's age appropriate in explaining how the future is for them and the reasons why. Does that make sense?
Right. No,
and I don't know exactly where that line is.
Right. No, I completely agree with that. And I think I struggle with that as a parent as well, of because for me, part of childhood should be that my children shouldn't have to think about this, right? That my children shouldn't have to be thinking about the implications of their actions. And at the same time, I have to protect them. So I do feel like it is this delicate, constant juggling thing that I completely understand where you're coming from. I don't have the answer to that, because I do feel like I'm constantly like, protect them, let them have innocence, let them be children, but also, right? Like, and as they've gotten a little bit older, I've had to say a little more about what they can and can't do, how they're going to be perceived. Like I said, my 10-year-old is almost as tall as me and he's 130 pounds, right? So I know that he unfortunately looks like an adult to some people. He's also on the spectrum. And we had an incident where sometimes he does things impulsively, where he kind of jumped. We were outside at night and he kind of jumped at jumped at somebody. And I had to have a conversation with him. Unfortunately, at 10, you are perceived as an adult, right? So I understand that. And there was also times where we've been out and we've been in places where I could tell that people were looking at them crazy and I did not say anything and I let them be children because I felt like I was there and I was able to protect them. So I completely understand where that's coming from. Anyone else want to speak to that or have thoughts about that? Adar?
So I have an 11-year-old niece, and those who know me know that this little girl is the light of my life. And I first had to start having conversations with her in a very intentional way. And let me back up and say, and because this is the work that I do, she's been coming with me as I train and facilitate since she was still in diapers. But the older she gets, the more she's asked questions. The first time I had to explain about the difference between how Black people in general are treated was when the police stopped her dad when she was about 4 years old. She was so upset, she was crying because of things that she'd seen on the news, stories from her friends. She thought that her father was going to die. She thought the police were going to shoot him. And we had to have this conversation when she was like a little girl. And so I had to reframe my thinking from protection to equipping. Mm-hmm. And how do I equip those littles in my life in an age-appropriate way so that they have some context to put these experiences in so that they are not filled with internalized oppression or that self-hatred, thinking that they or that their parents have done something wrong. How to counteract the mythology of American history that they are getting in school with their history of how their people came to be, not just in this country, but from their source, right, of where they came, Africa. And so we've had to have those conversations through our play with her dolls. I mean, there are a lot of different methods with which we do, but if we can switch, make the leap from protection to equipping, then it allows them their innocence a little bit more, and without them taking on that guilt load and that self-hatred mode that our children are so often forced into because of how they're being inculcated in racism and white supremacy, even as children.
Thank you, Adar. I like that concept of protection to equipping. I like that. Thank you. Anyone else?
I know that I've done work on adultification in the last year or so, just talking more about it. And it makes me really think deeply about my own relationship with my mother and my parents, but particularly with my mother. I think in a lot of the ways that she would try to protect me from things. But I realize, of course, as an adult now, and as someone who's worked with teenagers, a lot of that, some of it was it felt very harmful and I had to kind of unpack and do my own therapy around them. But a lot of it was also equipping me with information for me to recognize the world that I lived in, for me to have a very honest view. Now, obviously, when you're younger, you listen to your parents and you hear them, but you have to sometimes go through a few things, unfortunately, to kind of make that stuff real for you. But it just makes me think about how daunting that has got to be. I think that as I've gotten older, my mom passed away in 2016, but since she's passed, I've had to really think deeply about why she did what she did. All of it was not good. All of it I may not agree with, but that she was doing the best that she could with what she was given. And I think that has also got to be a part of the conversation, that a lot of parents, a lot of Black parents are raising their children with what they've been equipped with. And so as we're growing and changing and looking at how we talk about discipline, or how we talk about, conversations of racism and police brutality, whatever the case may be, but there has to be honesty. And so like, we've got to acknowledge that a lot of us may have not been equipped with those tools, but that the tools are present, and we've got to make sure we're equipping each other. And so I think, if anything, watching videos like this, listening to other parents, working with high school students myself, I've always been very as upfront and honest with them, like, it's gonna be hard for you. And this is why, and this is the way you should maybe think about dealing with this. Ultimately, they're gonna figure it out, hopefully, in a safe space, and they're gonna live to do that. But that's a part of the reality. And so I think, if anything, just makes me think very deeply about how trying it must be to be a parent. It's both a beauty, but it's also just like a very difficult, can feel very lonely. I think when you start adding, marginalization to that, it makes it even worse, because you want to protect your kids, and Black kids aren't protected, and that sucks. And so you try to make sure that they know before they leave your room, before they leave your house, and that's not an easy thing.
No, thank you, Julia. Anyone else? Okay, we're going to move on to our discussion questions. I'm going to give you all a few minutes to, get reflective, to think about the questions, think about what we've already discussed. So we have a few discussion questions, and take some time to journal. Feel free to turn your camera off if you want to while you're journaling, and then we'll come back and discuss. Any questions about the questions? All right, we'll go ahead and journal now. I think about 1 more minute and we'll start our discussion. All right, if we'll start to come back now, turn our cameras back on. Would anyone like to start us off on what they kind of journaled about, anything they want to share with the group, what things are coming up for them from the journaling exercise?
So one thing that came up for me was having participated in other 13th of the month sessions, that on this topic, the fact that we don't have as many people as we might have for other sessions just says something to me or makes me feel some type of way about how Black children are so devalued in this society. I mean, we've had topics that are not as compelling, where we've had way more people, or maybe not, I don't want to say not as compelling, I don't want to say not as important, but maybe in this point in time, you know, the relevance of it, when it's our children, that we don't have way more people. It says something to me and makes me feel some kind of way, both about how Black children are devalued and also about the overall anti-Blackness of society as a whole, that Black children are so devalued.
Thank you, Adar.
For question 2, I forget the exact wording of the question, but what it made me think about was how I was raised in a fairly politically active family, but political action can take can be a starting point for a lot of range of topics. But the only political activism that was, I guess, worth investing in was around race. Which, I mean, because that is, what was most important to us from a lens of safety, like keeping your children safe or keeping our family safe. These are the things that we need to do from a legacy standpoint. But what does that mean about climate change? or other things that are also important to people, to children? I like cats as a child. Can I rally around, those type of things? Even right now, I work at a school and they're doing a drive, getting toiletries, sheets, whatever, canned foods for pets, for barks. I think that's a worthy thing for children to rally around, but it doesn't get the same type of fervor, as you said, Adar, if we have a ceasefire event. but I mean, pets are like, it's all a part of the spectrum of our lives, basically, is what I'm trying to say. And it's like, how can we almost always focus around just this one thing, and then everything else not really seem worthy?
Thank you, Kendra.
I have a lot of feelings. I've kind of shared some of my emotions and feelings earlier in the conversation. And I've shared a little bit about my own family history in relation to this topic. I think that we've all definitely internalized negative attitudes about Black children. I think that a lot of us are trying to unpack and undo those things. That takes a lot of work. It's pretty much every single day making sure that you are not taking the usual story and using that against children. But the question that really got me thinking was the last one, what we can do as a community to try to mitigate some of the harms. And I think that the reason this got me thinking is because a lot of the time we are usually talking about this how can we protect them from these outside forces, which of course is like one part of the conversation. But I think even more importantly, how are we protecting them inside our own communities? How are we celebrating them? How are we telling them that they are smart and amazing? How are we not limiting them to what our personal ideals are, what we grew up with? I'm like, the world changed. Like, I'm 35. I remember, like, my mom and I used to get into debates about what my life would be. Now, of course, obviously, it's funny. I'm sure she laughs, but like certain stuff she was pretty like on the nose with, right? But the way that I was able to get that done was different than her. And she didn't have the world that she was talking about, that she was preparing me for, while some of the themes were the same, the layout was different. And so I think that we have to make sure we are equipping our children, whether you are a mother, whether you're an aunt, a neighbor, or a friend, whether you're a teacher, we've got to prepare them to be able to stand in any world. We have to prepare them to feel like they can actually be active. So if they're out there protesting about climate change or their favorite animal, we have to celebrate that and really take that. I think that's the way to mitigate. I think that we have to start within us. And I can't be worried about, but I can't always be worried about like white people and what the state is gonna do, or what white supremacy is gonna do, because I have to make sure that these kids who are part of my community are okay. The work that we do here at BRJA is like lifelong work, right? And I say it all the time, I have made peace with the fact that a lot of the things that we're working towards, I more than likely will not see. Like, I'm not going to see, like, probably the downfall of white supremacy. That's probably well outside of my lifespan. But that the work continues is, I think, most important. And so that means equipping our children and also celebrating them for the gifts that they bring to the conversation. It's not about changing them. It's about how can they best use their skills and their gifts, and celebrating that. I think that's a lot of the things that doesn't always happen. We don't celebrate our kids because we're afraid for them, and we get it. But we have to, it's not just all Black death and sadness, there's a lot of joy. And so I think that we have to make sure we incorporate that into how we mitigate harm from ourselves, from each in our community and outside of our community.
Yes, thank you, Julia. Julia, as you were talking, I was thinking about, and I want Kendra to talk a little bit about this too, about gentle parenting. And I started gentle parenting before I'd heard the term. I was raised old school. My parents were born in 55 and 54, and I was definitely raised old school. And when I had my children, I had to do a lot of unpacking and thinking about why my parents and why, culturally, why we did certain things, right? And we were talking earlier about, I think Kendra had said something about performative discipline, and I think someone else said something about doing things because you're embarrassed. I can't tell y'all how many times I was in Target or the store and my kids was acting crazy and other Black people were looking at me and it was uncomfortable. But I'm not gonna, my child's 2, my child's 18 months, whatever age they were, and I'm going to let them have a tantrum. You know what I'm saying? I'm going to let them yell, scream, do whatever toddlers or 18-month-olds or 2-year-olds or 3-year-olds do, because they are babies. And I'm going to give them the space to do that, even though it's uncomfortable for me, because socially, that's not acceptable. And I had to unpack things like letting my children decide what they wanted to eat. I never had the choice growing up about what I wanted to eat, what I wanted to wear, couldn't pick out my own clothes. It was just, this is old school. You do what I say, and that's it. We don't discuss it. You know, so I know for myself, there was a lot of processing and unpacking and just questioning, why is this done? Is this necessary? Doesn't matter if my kid does X, Y, Z. You know, so I know that has been a process for me. Kendra, did you want to share anything about your gentle parenting journey?
Yeah. So firstly, I'll say, mad props to my parents, because I feel like I don't have a lot to unpack in terms of like unlearning compared to most. Not that they were perfect. There are many things that I probably do like fight my parents on. But I think even they and their older parents kind of did like gentle parenting in their own way from their context. So as much as I don't remember, I know that I was spanked at a point, but I don't actually remember what that was. When my parents never gave me much of an issue with me saying like, no, my children aren't going to be hit. Like that's definitely not a thing. That's not what we're rolling with. And further to that point, you're also not going to talk to the children any kind of way. Like, I think that's probably the next step and the next frontier that a lot of people don't realize. Like some of the things that you say can be damaging to children. Some, you know, and it's not even necessarily always yelling. It's just like some statements that you make. And or much like you said, like about being able to choose what they wear or choose how they eat, or potentially like the you know, just basically them being kids. It's my through line is always to allow my children to answer the, I guess one of the questions is how do we change this, is to let children be kids, full stop. Like to give them the opportunity to express themselves in whatever way that looks like. And then from an emotional standpoint as the adult, if like stop, if you feel like something is bubbling up in you based upon your own previous programming, and recognizing yourself, like, does it, like you said, Michelle, does it actually have to be this way? There are plenty of times where it's not just the program that I've experienced from the, I guess, the outside race, but interracially, where I have to think about that impacts, like I was saying earlier in the discussion, that impacts how I have to judge. I still have that voice of the judgment, but I do make it my responsibility to recognize that that's somebody else's voice, is not my own. And I will not parent through that lens. So as an example, black girls' hair, real big thing, real big deal. How long it is, the texture of it, whether you add fake hair to it, all of these different things, and what age is age appropriate, all of those different things. That for me, and my daughter is almost 12, has been an issue that I have to regularly tackle. But I tackle it. I don't let her tackle it. And if it bumps up against me emotionally, the things that she tries to do, and I don't necessarily have the answers for it, I also let her know that it might be, you know, it's uncomfortable for me and I don't know why.
Yeah.
Because I also don't want to pretend like I have all of the answers either. Like I really want to be honest in my parents and with them about that. Like I don't have it. I don't have all the answers.
Right.
Let's see if this works. Maybe, or what the balance is. Maybe you can have colored hair, but maybe you can't. I'm just throwing this together. But like maybe you can have colored hair, but maybe you can't have colored hair all the way, extensions. Something. I don't know. And I also had to explain to her probably, the reasons why, but I'm not telling her no, full stop. Because what? Because of society?
Yeah.
No, that's not fair. Especially if I want my children to overcome the idea that they have to perform for other people all the way around. I want them to have the autonomy to do the things that they have determined to be right for them.
Can I just say something really quick?
I have
Oh, go ahead, Ray. I'm so sorry. Go ahead.
So I guess as a curveball to throw into this topic of what is it, gentle? Because I never heard of that term, but gentle
Okay.
parenting, is that the term? Okay,
Yes.
so the traditional parenting, do we think that it was effective? Because we're a product of that traditional parenting. You know, my mother was kind of strict. She wasn't like Ike Turner-ish, but she was kind of strict, you know what I mean? So the way we parent our kids now, or not the way society parents their kids now, is that beneficial? Because, you know, some might say, well, kids today are more rude because they don't have that foundation of kind of strict but not abusive as far as parenting. Some kids are soft, as the quote unquote soft now, because you know they is sensitive about any and everything now, because the parents they're too lenient on their kids. They let the kids get away with a lot of things versus the traditional parenting, where it's like, you know, dad say, you know, you got to be in bed at a certain time, you got to do this at a certain time, you know. Is it better now, or was it better then?
Okay. I was gonna, so honestly, this actually fits really well into what I was gonna say before Ray made his statement, is that from listening to the parents talk, and I've seen even like when I've worked with high schoolers, how much of our idea of parenting is linked to policing. Like a lot of our parenting, or this traditional idea of parenting, is linked to power imbalance and reminding children about who is in power, and then therefore that is replicated when they are leaving the nest. And so, like, look, growing up, like I know in my household, like, yeah, we definitely had like rules, and we had you know, things that we had to follow, and chores and all of that stuff. But I also know that like it wasn't a lot of stuff that I could decide for myself. And so when it was actually time for me to decide for myself, I had a hard time being like, well, wait, do I do this or not? Is this the right thing to do or not? All because like I didn't necessarily get that kind of you know, experience, because parenting, and I would say, especially I think in the Black community, if I can only speak from that point of view, is rife with do as I say, not as I do. And when I think about what I'm hearing, like Ray explain, like, oh, well, kids are like, you know, they speak back. It's like, but what's the real issue with that? What are we afraid of as adults, to be challenged on our thoughts and our rules? Like, we want the world to change, but we're not raising children to question. And the questioning doesn't start outside of the home. Honestly, as uncomfortable as it might be, it starts inside. It starts with me saying, like, well, why is this the way it is? Why is it that like my dad gets fed first? Because that was my big thing. Why does he get the biggest piece of chicken? That was a really big debate in my house. Like, why does he get the biggest piece of meat? And we get these kind of like these very like kind of inconspicuous things. And my mom always laughed at me because she was like, I don't know what you're gonna be, but I know that you were not going to take anything from anybody. But like that wasn't completely true. It was like, so I think that it has to happen at home. We have got to stop this idea that people who are going to change the world, who are going to be out here, you know, moving us forward into things that we have not even realized yet, that those are going to come from just traditional ways of thinking. We have got to make spaces for our children. They should be able to question. They should be able to push back. They should be able to explore themselves. And granted, you might be uncomfortable as a parent. You may not agree, but unfortunately, you're not going to always be here. And we have got to make sure that our children feel comfortable in their own skin. They feel comfortable in their own voice. And that means sometimes being like, I don't want to wear that. Like, I want to wear red lipstick. That's not for you. Why? Nobody can explain to me why. But it was a thing. Love red lipstick now. It's like, but it is imperative that we start thinking about how power and all of these things are connected to how we talk to our own children, because we're just setting them up for when they listen to the police or whomever else is in power when they leave our spaces.
Thank you, Julia. Julia, I like how you keep talking about how it is our job to get this next generation or the generation after them ready to dismantle even more than what we have, right? They have to interrogate even more than we have, right? They are the ones who will own the future, not us. And we do have to set them up for that. And just kind of piggyback on what Julia was saying, Ray, like, for instance, like, what is rude? Who decides what's rude, right? and I let my children talk back to me. I had to unpack that too, that whole talking back thing. What does that mean? That's just my children expressing themselves. That's what talking back is. And we weren't allowed to do that. There was I said this as a parent, and that is it, right? And so because I have let my children speak their minds to me, there have been times when I have lied to my kids because I didn't want to tell them a certain thing. And my son said to me, "You don't normally lie to me. Why are you lying to me about this?" My parents would have killed me if I said that to them, right? And I love that I have raised children that challenge me, that they are like, oh, this is the way mommy wants us to be. This is the way she has taught us to be. And now I'm turning it back on her and I'm challenging her. And we need to get comfortable with letting our children challenge us. That is uncomfortable for us because that's not how we were raised. That's not our culture. But this is the future. So thank you, Julia, for keep bringing that back to the future.
So can I say that I also heard something more in Dunstan's question, which is about boundaries. What are the parameters of that? And I really relate to that piece of it, right? And I do so from two perspectives. First of all, I do think that it takes a village, because I know that in my role as auntie, there are things that my niece will talk to me about and ways that she will express with me, because this is the relationship we have. And that relationship is different than a parenting relationship. So, there are different boundaries and different parameters, but for her dad and for me, we have the discussions, intentional discussions about what our relationship is with her, and intentional discussions about what the boundaries of the relationship, what that will be, right? And that's a really different conversation to me than the kind of mindless do it because I say so, or the operating out of, not even thinking about what the boundaries are. I mean, he and I remember when she was born and we were having this conversation about what type of, we didn't even, we weren't even into the child, although we were, but we were in the child all the way up to adulthood. What type of young person are we responsible for growing? And so intentional conversations about how we were parented and the things that we thought were good and the things that we thought were absolutely not. And how we wanted to be with her. And we very intentionally talked about our roles. He gave me assignments for, my role in Keela's life and what he wanted that to be. And I have, I've honored that and will honor that until the day I die, right? And so what I hear you talking about, Dunstan, are the parameters of parenting, and the fact that maybe your daughter, there are ways that you'll be with your daughter that will not be, where you will have stricter parameters than the ways in which your wife or her aunts or her uncles or whomever in her life will be with her. So my question for us all is, do we have these intentional conversations so that we are all parenting or auntying or uncling or whatever the roles in our lives, that we're doing that as a village with the understanding that these are our roles, and that all of us are wrapping arms around these young people? Or are we not even having these conversations, and so everybody is doing their own thing about it? And and whatever happens just happens. That's what I'm wondering.
And can I
Right,
speak to
I
that?
agree with that. One thing I also like to say, like, okay, so my daughter goes to karate, right? And when her sensei say, be quiet, do this, turn here, do that, bow, she has to do it, right? He's not being strict. He's teaching her to be, I guess, in line, right? Not conform, but be in line, be respectful, have honor, have dignity, right? When she goes back home to me, I have to be that and beyond because I can't word it the way he does it, right? He will say one thing and she'll get it. I will have to tell her 10 times before she gets it, right? So it has to be a balance in being, what was that word y'all said earlier? Because I never heard of that. That soft, not soft.
Oh,
That wasn't the
gentle
word you
parenting.
used. What was it called?
Gentle parenting.
Gentle parenting. It has to be a balance between the gentle parenting and the traditional, not strict, but you know that you're out of line and you have to come back to the other side. You get me? If it was up to my daughter, if I let her make all her choices, she'll never go to school on time. She'll miss the bus. She won't go to sleep because she's playing Fortnite with me most of the time, but she's playing Fortnite. I'm a dog, I can do that, right? She don't want to get off the game. So you have to be that parent, right? And she will cry. She will cry like a sailor, but you have to be strict as a parent. It's going to hurt their feelings. You're going to come off rude to them, but you know, as a parent, I'm telling you right from wrong. If I'm telling you eat your broccoli and you're saying no, it's disgusting, right? I'm telling you it's a reason why I'm doing this. I think the way to parent is to tell your kids, what, because you know right from wrong. Tell your kids, what to do. Kaden, eat this. Kaden, eat that. And she asks you why, then tell her why. This is healthy for you. This is a better choice than you eating Oreos all day, right? So that's what I'm trying to convey. Like, do both, right? If Kaden is rude to me, I'm gonna let her know that she's being rude and she should know in the future to not do that. But a lot of times, kids nowadays, they'll push parents' button. They'll keep doing the same thing because parents don't really parent them the way that it should be, because parents a lot of time, even me, I look back like, my mother, I don't want to be like how my mother wasn't harsh, but my father was, right? My father was very, very harsh. My father used to whip my brothers, right? Never laid a hand on me because I knew from seeing that and hearing that, I don't want that to happen to me, right? That's the fear. But even that fear, it shaped me to where I am now, to be like, okay, I'm a good person. I don't have to be like that to my daughter where she fears daddy hitting her or whatever, being too aggressive, you know what I mean? But she knows, like, she can have her choices, but she know when I say this, you got to kind of do that, because as a parent, I know better, right?
Yeah, so
No, I think
I don't want to stay on the gentle parenting thing too long. So I just want to say that those of us who choose the gentle parent, it doesn't mean that we don't have parameters for our children. It doesn't mean we just let them do anything they want. Although sometimes I do let them have natural consequences. But I just wanted to say, it doesn't mean we're not still, leading our children and guiding our children. We're still doing all those things. I know for me personally, I try not to hit my children. I also try to give them autonomy and agency. I try to apologize to them. Those are things that I personally try to do in my parenting that was not done for me. So I just want to say that. I know that it is a little past 7:30 now. Were there any other thoughts, questions, anything that anyone wanted to share?
I'll just reiterate what you said, Michelle, and said, it's gentle parenting, but it's still definitely parenting.
Yes, very much so.
We're still parenting.
Very much so. All right. I just want to thank everyone for coming, enjoying this discussion. We will have a recording of this. If that will be on our YouTube page if you want to share it with anyone or if you missed parts of it. So please be on the lookout for that. Dana, did you want to share the slide for our social media and our giving? Do we have a closing slide for that? So please follow us on social media about our upcoming 13th of the month events. And we're also going to be having events for June to celebrate our 20th anniversary. So please be on the lookout. Follow us on social media. And thank you all so much for coming this evening.
Thank you.
Bye. Thank you.
Thank you.